Now, there are many different kinds of leaks. Some are just about palace intrigue and infighting, but others are national security related. These are 18 stories based on anonymous sources and leaks just from the past week. There was a torrent of them, including 2 full transcripts of President Trump's early conversations with the leaders of Mexico and Australia. That leak to the Washington Post was extraordinary and concerned a lot of people. Some say it crossed the line. Others say we need a lot more of those leaks, not less. Joining me now, Matt Schlapp. He's the chairman of the American Conservative Union and former political director to President George W. Bush, and Trevor Timm, executive director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation and a columnist for The Guardian and Columbia Journalism Review. Trevor, what was your reaction to Jeff Sessions' event on Friday?
Well, I think Jeff Sessions' press conference was incredibly disturbing on multiple levels. You know, as you mentioned in the opening, he said that they were going to triple the amount of leak investigations from the Obama administration. The Obama administration actually prosecuted more whistleblowers and leakers than all other administrations combined. So I think it's incredibly concerning that he is going to even increase that amount. But I think further, you know, he talked about how he was going to revisit the guidelines for issuing subpoenas to journalists, which is incredibly dangerous to the rights of reporters everywhere.
Tell us what that would mean.
Well, you know, there are strict rules in place in the Justice Department that prevent them from issuing subpoenas to have journalists to testify, except in very, very rare cases. And what Jeff Sessions is essentially indicating is that he wants to call more reporters to the stand and essentially force them into jail if they refuse to testify. And then, as you mentioned, they also refuse to rule out prosecuting journalists directly, which is a huge First Amendment issue and would send a chill down the spine, I think, of any journalist in Washington or beyond.
These officials are not saying it's going to happen. They're just keeping the door open to the possibility. Does that concern you as well, Matt?
You know, I think what we heard from Rod Rosenstein this morning and what we heard from Jeff Sessions is that they are doing a review on what their authority is and what it is not. I do find it quite ironic that Obama can prosecute so many leakers, but yet Jeff Sessions wants to continue this trend, and it's a horrible travesty of the First Amendment.
Matt, we were very critical of Obama for doing that.
But I wasn't. I actually think
when you're
because I think when you're national, there are leaks, there are whistleblowers, and there are people that are exposing information that is illegal and sometimes criminal. And what General Kelly is coming into this West Wing, into this White House, is saying is that you put your country first, you put your service to the president next, and understand that there are times when you're leaking information, and if it's crime, we're going to go after that crime. And I applaud him for that. I don't want to
show. That story is about to be on the show. She had a dozen sources quoting her story. So doesn't that mean White House aides leaked John Kelly's warning not to leak?
Well, I know you guys have enjoyed the last 6 months of leaks and the months before that. But for many of us around the country, we think there's too much information coming out of the West Wing in a spastic fashion, which does feed a lot of coverage, but it's really not helping them with their agenda. So I'm a partisan. I'd like to see them succeed with their agenda. This excessive amount of leaking to play one-upsmanship with other people in the West Wing is actually hurting their agenda, and it's demoralizing their supporters.
You said you guys have enjoyed the last 6 months. I think journalists...
I mean the press.
I know exactly what you mean. I think journalists, no matter who they're covering, appreciate more information.
Of course.
So it's a bipartisan situation.
Hey, look, I read you and watch you to know what's going on in the West Wing. That's really never happened before. Usually people who had friends working in the West Wing would know the true story. Sometimes you know the true story by reading these news accounts.
And you're saying that's not necessarily journalists' fault. That's the fault of the leakers inside the government.
Absolutely. That's the fault of the people in the administration who are putting themselves above the president's agenda.
Let's take a look, Trevor, at something we saw from, actually, I was going to say this week, but it's a daily occurrence on Fox News, on Hannity's program. We decided to look at one night's program, Friday nights, and how many times Hannity talked about the so-called deep state. Check this out.
The deep state, the deep state. I have been warning you every night for months. The deep state, deep state, the deep state, deep state, deep state, deep state, deep state, the deep state, the deep state. This is the greatest challenge of our time, and I don't overstate this.
Hannity says he's not overstating it, Trevor. I'm curious what you think the impact of that daily repetition from Sean Hannity is, knowing that the president is an avid viewer of Hannity's.
Well, look, I think there's two separate issues here. One, our intelligence agencies should certainly be more transparent and held more accountable. That is held true in the Trump administration and administrations in past. But I think the real point here is that journalists have the ability and the right to publish classified information in the public interest and have exercised that right, thankfully, for the past 4 or 5 decades. And we have a situation here where, take, for example, the Washington Post story, which caused so much controversy this week, where Donald Trump is basically admitted in this transcript that one of his signature campaign promises to have Mexico pay for the wall was a complete fraud. People are arguing that this is damaging to national security, but there is, if you read the transcripts, there's literally nothing in there that is even remotely sensitive. And the broader point here is that Trump is claiming that scoop after scoop by the New York Times, the Washington Post, is fake news. And these reporters have the right and almost the obligation, when information comes their way, to publish it, to refute those lies. And I think that we've seen incredible work by these newspapers. And we have to remember
Did you notice that yesterday the president tweeted a favorable Washington Post story about ISIS? It was favorable to him, so he shared that so-called fake news story. Matt, last word to you?
Yeah, real quickly here, Brian. We have a 200-year history where administrations have been able to talk to reporters when our national security is at stake with information. And there have been Democrat presidents and Republican presidents who have talked to journalists who have decided at times not to print things. This is not carte blanche. There are times when journalists, too, have to use their best discretion. Remember, just because you get a leak from the West Wing doesn't mean it's accurate. My big test for all of you is make sure it's accurate. I'm not judging the fact that it's always inaccurate, but when you're talking about our national